I spent 31 years working as a family court mediator in Toronto. My entire career was built on one skill: staying calm when everyone around me was falling apart. I sat across from people on the worst days of their lives: custody battles, restraining orders, separations that had been rotting for years before anyone admitted it. I learned to read a room the way some people read a book. I noticed the small things: the way a man would glance at his wife before she answered a question, the way a woman would shrink slightly when her husband shifted in his chair. I was trained to see what people worked hard to hide. I never thought I would need that training in my own family. My daughter, I'll call her my daughter, because that's all she is to me, the most important person in my life, met her husband at a sailing club in Vancouver. She had moved there after finishing her master's degree, working in urban planning for the city. She was 31, independent, had her own apartment near Commercial Drive, a group of friends she'd had since university. She called me every Sunday. We were close in the way that mothers and daughters can be close when they've both put in the work, honest with each other, sometimes uncomfortably so. Her husband was introduced to me over a video call first. He seemed warm. He asked about my work. He listened when I spoke, which I noticed because a lot of people don't. He was 40, worked in commercial real estate, owned a condo in Kitsilano. My daughter laughed differently around him, lighter somehow, like something that had been held tight had finally loosened. I told myself that was a good sign. I believed that for longer than I should have. They got engaged 14 months after they met. The proposal was thoughtful. He had arranged a private dinner at a restaurant in Gastown where they'd had their first date. My daughter called me that night, and I could hear in her voice that she was genuinely happy. I drove out to Vancouver the following weekend, and the three of us had brunch together in Yaletown. He was attentive. He refilled her coffee before she asked. He reached over and touched her hand when she was telling a story. Everything looked right. I flew home to Toronto and told my sister he seemed like a good man. I meant it. The wedding was held the following September on a property in the Okanagan, one of those vineyard estates near Naramata that people rent for exactly this kind of occasion. It was beautiful in the way that September in the Okanagan always is, the hills already going gold, the lake flat and silver in the morning. His parents flew in from Calgary. His mother was polished in the way that some women from that generation are polished: expensive clothes, careful hair, the kind of social confidence that fills a room before you've had a chance to decide whether you like the person. She hugged me at the rehearsal dinner and called me family now, and I smiled and said, "Yes, we are." His father was quieter, deferential to his wife in a way I noticed but set aside. People have all kinds of marriages. My daughter was radiant on her wedding day. I'm not saying that because I'm her mother. I'm saying it because it was true, and because it's one of the images I return to now, her standing in that dress, completely herself, completely present. I want to remember her that way. Before the year that followed, the first thing I noticed was small. It always is. About 3 months after the wedding, I came to Vancouver for a long weekend. We were planning to go to the farmer's market on Saturday morning, something we'd done together for years whenever I visited. My daughter had mentioned it on the phone the week before. She was excited about it, had looked up a particular vendor. When Saturday came, her husband mentioned he had been hoping to drive out to Steveston, that he'd been thinking about it for a few days, that the market would be there next week. He didn't demand anything. He just said it in a way that made it clear the other option had already been decided. My daughter looked at me and said, "Steveston's nice, Mum. We can do the market next time." I said, "Of course." We drove to Steveston. I watched seagulls and ate fish and chips and told myself that marriage is full of small compromises and this was nothing. But I kept noticing, because that's what I do. By Christmas, 4 months after the wedding, my daughter was editing herself. Not dramatically, not in a way most people would catch. But I had spent 3 decades watching people edit themselves in front of their partners, and I knew the signs. She would start a sentence and pause. She would glance at him before finishing a thought. When she told a story, she would leave out the parts that were about her own accomplishments and lead with the parts that involved him. Once, at dinner, she made a joke that landed well, and then immediately looked at him to gauge his reaction before she allowed herself to smile at it. He never said anything overtly unkind in front of me. That was the precision of it. What he said was things like, "You always exaggerate lightly, in company, as though it were affectionate," and "She's the dreamer, I'm the realist," and once, when she was describing a project she'd led at work, he said, "She undersells herself. The team did most of the heavy lifting." She laughed it off. I watched her laugh it off. I drove to the airport on the 27th of December and sat in departures and made a list in my head. Not because I was sure, because I had learned, a long time ago, that the time to start paying attention is before you're certain. By the following spring, she was calling me less. When we did speak, the conversations were shorter. She sounded careful. She had left her position with the city. She told me it was a mutual decision, that they had talked about it, that his income was enough, and she wanted to take some time. She had been passionate about her work. She had a 5-year plan that she'd described to me in detail 2 Christmases ago. I asked gentle questions and got careful answers, and I understood that I was now someone she was managing rather than confiding in. That frightened me more than anything else. I called my sister that night. I told her what I had been observing over the past year. My sister asked if I was sure I wasn't reading into things. I told her that I had spent 31 years being paid specifically not to read into things, and I was not reading into this. I booked a flight to Vancouver for the following month. I told my daughter I was coming. I did not tell her everything else I was planning. Before I flew out, I called an old colleague, a woman I'd worked alongside for many years, who had since moved into a senior role at a legal aid organization in Ontario. I asked her some questions about documentation, about what kinds of records mattered and what kinds didn't, about timelines. She didn't ask me why I was asking. She knew me well enough to know that I didn't ask questions without a reason. I also called my daughter's closest friend from university, a woman she had been close to since they were 18, who lived in North Vancouver and who I had met many times over the years. I asked her, carefully, how my daughter seemed to her. There was a pause before she answered. The pause told me what I needed to know. She said, "I don't see her as much as I used to. He's not unfriendly, exactly." But it got complicated. She stopped there. Then she said, "I've been worried about her too." I arrived on a Thursday. My daughter seemed genuinely glad to see me, the relief of someone who has been alone in something for too long. But she was also watchful. She kept her phone face up on the counter. She mentioned twice, unprompted, how much her husband had been working lately, how tired he was, how she was trying to be considerate of his schedule. She was explaining him to me before I had said a single word. Friday was fine. We had lunch together while he was at work, and for a few hours she was something closer to herself, laughing more, her sentences longer, her thoughts less edited. Then we heard the door at 6 o'clock, and she straightened up. Not dramatically, just slightly, the way you adjust when someone enters a room. Saturday was the dinner. His parents had driven down from Kelowna. They were spending a few weeks in the region and had come to visit. His mother arrived with a bottle of wine she made a point of mentioning, had cost over $100, and she placed it on the counter in a way that was more announcement than gift. She hugged my daughter briefly, and then turned to her son, and the two of them talked with the ease of people who had their own language. My daughter had been cooking since early afternoon. She had made a rack of lamb, not a simple meal, with roasted root vegetables and a wild rice dish with cranberries that I knew she'd practiced the week before because she'd mentioned it on the phone. She had set the table carefully. She had thought about this dinner. We sat down around 7. The wine was poured. Conversation moved across the table. At some point, his mother made a comment about the rice. Not a direct criticism, the kind that's more subtle than that. She said, "I always find wild rice sits a bit heavy, don't you?" And looked around the table for agreement. My daughter said nothing. She picked up her fork. Her husband looked at his plate. Then he said, "It's a bit under-seasoned." He said it flatly, not cruelly. In the tone of someone commenting on weather, the table went quiet for a moment. I watched my daughter. She did not look up. She set her fork back down very carefully beside her plate. She had spent the afternoon on this meal. She had been so eager 2 days earlier to tell me about the cranberry rice. I watched her put that version of herself away, quietly, like folding something into a drawer. His mother said, "Oh, I'm sure it's fine." That was when I understood that the conversation about the rice wasn't about rice. Later in the evening, after the dishes had been cleared, after his parents had settled into the living room, my daughter was in the kitchen. I had gone to help her. Her husband came in to refill his glass, and she said something I didn't fully hear, something light, trying to recover the evening. He said, not loudly but clearly, "You always make things awkward. Just let it go." She didn't respond. She ran the water in the sink. He left the kitchen. I stood behind my daughter, and I put my hand on her back, and I felt how tense she was. The kind of tension that doesn't come from one dinner, that comes from months of being that tense, and eventually forgetting you're doing it. I did not say anything then. I had learned a long time ago that the moment of shock is not the moment for the important conversation. You have to wait for people to be ready to hear you. That night, lying in the guest room, I was completely calm. That might sound strange, but the calm was not indifference. The calm was clarity. I knew what I was looking at. I had known, in the accumulated way, you know, things that arrive slowly over months, for a while now. The dinner had not surprised me. It had confirmed me. I opened the notes application on my phone. I had been adding to it for 4 months. Dates, descriptions, things I had observed, things her friend had told me, things that struck me as significant at the time. I read back through it. Then I added Saturday's dinner. I noted the time, who was present, what was said, what was not said. I did not sleep very much that night. The next morning I asked my daughter if she wanted to go for a walk before everyone else was up. She said yes. We walked down toward the water, the morning cool and overcast in the way that Vancouver mornings in May can be. She had her hands in her jacket pockets. We were a block from the house before she said anything, and what she said was, "I know what you're thinking." I said, "What am I thinking?" She said, "That things aren't right." I kept walking. I didn't fill the silence. She said, "It's more complicated than it looks from the outside." And then she stopped walking. And then, very quietly, she began to tell me things she had not said out loud to anyone. She talked for a long time. I did not interrupt. I did not offer solutions or tell her what she should do. I listened, the way I had been trained to listen, without an agenda, without the next sentence already prepared, without making her account for herself. When she was done, I asked her one question: "Do you feel safe?" She didn't answer right away. The answer took a while to arrive, and when it did, it was not a yes. I held her for a long time on that quiet street in East Vancouver. The seagulls were loud overhead. Somewhere on the next block, a dog was barking. Then I told her very calmly that I needed her to understand something. I told her I had been doing something for the past several months. I had been keeping a record. I had also spoken to a colleague of mine, I didn't tell her who, and I had some information I wanted to share with her when she was ready. I told her she was not alone in this, and she had not been alone in it. I told her I was not here to make decisions for her, but I needed her to know that I was ready to help her, in whatever way she needed, the moment she asked me. She said, "I'm not ready yet." I said, "I know, that's okay." She said, "I'm scared." I said, "I know that too. And I want you to know that being scared is not the same as being trapped." We walked back to the house. We had coffee with everyone as though the morning were ordinary. I helped make pancakes. I smiled when I was supposed to smile. I caught my daughter's eye once across the kitchen, and what passed between us in that look was an entire conversation. I flew home on Monday. Over the next 6 weeks, I did several things. I found a family lawyer in Vancouver who specialized in this kind of situation. Not a dramatic search, just a careful, methodical one, using the Law Society of British Columbia's referral directory and a call to my colleague for a recommendation. I made an appointment to speak with her by phone, and I walked through what I had observed. She told me what was and wasn't useful documentation and how to think about the next steps in a way that protected my daughter. I connected my daughter's friend in North Vancouver back into her life. Slowly, intentionally, I called her and asked if she would reach out, just casually, and she said she had been waiting for a reason. That one conversation between the two of them, the following week, opened something. My daughter called me afterward sounding different than she had in months. I also called the Battered Women's Support Services line in BC, not on behalf of my daughter, but to understand the resources that existed so that when she was ready I would not be fumbling. I wrote down numbers. I learned about timelines and housing supports and the options available to someone in her situation, including financially, because I knew that one of the things keeping her there was the fact that she had left her job and their finances were entangled in a way that felt like a wall. I did not call her husband. I did not confront his mother. I did not arrive in Vancouver unannounced. I have seen, in my professional life, what happens when the people who want to help move faster than the person who needs help is ready for. It destroys trust. It closes doors. It gives the abuser something to point to. I was not going to do that to my daughter. 8 weeks after that Sunday morning walk, my daughter called me at 11 o'clock at night. She was crying. She had decided. She didn't know how. She just knew she had decided. I told her, "I know how. I've been waiting to tell you." She came to Toronto 3 weeks later, on the pretext of visiting me. She brought 2 suitcases, which was everything that mattered. The lawyer in Vancouver had already sent the initial paperwork. Her friend in North Vancouver had been helping coordinate logistics from there. A women's organization I had contacted had helped us understand the process around the separation agreement and the spousal support provisions under the Divorce Act, which mattered because of the financial dependence she had been placed in. Her husband was served the following Tuesday. I was not there for it. I didn't need to be. It took time after that. It takes time. My daughter moved into a short-term rental in Toronto while things sorted themselves out. And for the first 2 months she was not okay. Not in a way that could be fixed quickly, not in a way that I could mediate or document or resolve by being organized. She had to sit with what had happened to her. She had to relearn her own opinions, her own preferences, what she actually wanted for dinner, without pausing to calculate whether it was the right answer. I learned things from this, too. I learned that loving someone and seeing what they can't see about their own situation does not give you the right to move faster than they can. I learned that the most useful thing I could do was not to intervene dramatically, but to be completely ready, completely informed, and completely patient. I learned that preparation done quietly, in advance, without announcement, is sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do. What I also know is this: the hardest moment in all of it was not that Saturday dinner, and it was not watching my daughter in the kitchen with the water running. The hardest moment was that walk the next morning when I asked her if she felt safe and had to wait for an answer that didn't come easily. Because in that moment, I was not a mediator. I was a mother, and there is no training in the world that teaches you how to hold that question in the air while the seagulls circle and your daughter decides whether she trusts herself enough to tell the truth. She does, now. She has been back in Vancouver for 3 months. Different part of the city, her own place, a basement suite in the East End with a good landlord, and a gas fireplace she lights every evening. She went back to urban planning, not for the city she is consulting, on her own schedule. She has reconnected with people she had drifted away from. She calls me on Sundays again, and the conversations are long, and she finishes her sentences. We don't talk about him often. When we do, she is matter-of-fact about it in the way that people are when they have done the work of understanding something without needing to keep circling it. Last month she told me she had started running in the mornings along the seawall. She said the mornings had become her favorite part of the day. I told her that sounded like exactly right. If you are watching this and something in this story felt familiar, not as a memory of someone else's life, but as a description of your own, I want you to hear this. You do not need to have it all figured out before you say something to someone. You do not need the evidence organized, or the plan complete, or the worst moment to have already happened. You can reach out before you are ready. In Canada, the Assaulted Women's Helpline is available at 1-866-863-0511, 24 hours a day, in over 200 languages. There are people who will not rush you, who will not tell you what to decide, who will simply help you understand what your options are. That is all I wanted. When I was standing on that street in East Vancouver, to give my daughter options, to make sure she knew they existed, to be ready when she was. Tell me what city you're watching from today. And if this story reached you, really reached you, please share it. Someone in your life may need to hear it more than you know.